Welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll with your host, Tiffany Scott. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Hidden History of Rock and Roll.
Welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll. I am Tiffany Scott, and this is my inaugural podcast show. In this podcast, you are going to get an exclusive look into the origins of the world's most iconic rock bands and discover stories you never knew existed. We are going to jump right in and get to my first guest. As you can probably guess, he is someone I have known all my life. Someone who spent his entire career helping lift the musical careers of some of the most influential rock bands of our time. Please welcome Jon Scott to the show.
Hello, Tiffany.
Hello, Jon. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Good to be here with you.
This is amazing. Thank you for doing my first podcast.
I'm ready.
So you have helped launch the careers of some of the greatest rock musicians of our time. You've told the story.
That's what they tell me, yeah.
You have told the story of your 40-year relationship with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in your 2018 book, Tom Petty and Me. But I would like to do a deeper dive into the untold stories, the bands you have not talked about publicly, and as I like to call them, the friends and family stories. You have such a long resume of artists that you've collaborated with at MCA Records. You had the opportunity to work with The Who, Olivia Newton-John, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Elton John, Golden Earring, and Johnny Cougar, just to name a few. Because this list is so long and the stories are endless, I'd like to dedicate each podcast with you personally to each individual band, because each individual comes with so many funny stories. So today's podcast, I'd like to dedicate this show to your time with the band The Who.
I love The Who.
Yeah, they were an incredible rock band.
Oh my God.
They were formed in 1962 in London. They were considered one of the most influential rock bands of the 20th century, and they were also among the loudest concerts ever recorded. So what was your first time meeting The Who? What was that like?
Well, let me tell you, before you said they're one of the loudest rock bands, and I used to stand on stage with them when they were playing. So I will agree with you that they were one of the loudest rock bands because I had to get hearing aids.
Wow.
I mean, I used to stand on the stage next to Pete Townsend and just watching to the windmills and jumping, and it was just an incredible experience because when I was a kid, about 17 years old, I first heard The Who on the radio, and I loved them. And something just stuck with me about that band, The Who, and I never thought at the time I would, of course, work with them. Mm-hmm. But I did. I got to work for them. I went to work for MCA Records. I was a DJ before that, and the strange thing about working with The Who was when I was a kid, 1964 or so, I heard their first song on the radio, and it just flipped me out. Mm-hmm. And I often wondered what would be like working with a band like The Who.
So when you met them, what was it like for you recalling that memory, and then fast forward to you suddenly working with the band? What was that like? What must have been going through your mind?
Well, The Who were like one of my favorite bands in the world. And my mom used to call radio stations in Memphis and request songs and request that they be dedicated to her. And when the DJ on the radio said, "This is going out to, my mom," she put a big smile on her face and she was laughing, and I would do anything for my mom. And I said to her, "I want to be a DJ just to make you happy, and I'm going to be a DJ." And she went out the next day. My parents didn't have a lot of money, but she bought me a tape recorder at Sears or Roebuck, and I took a bunch of magazines and just started playing like I was a DJ. So I was just practicing for 3 or 4 years of being a DJ. knowing that I wanted to be a DJ. And sure enough, that happened. I went to work at a station called FM 100 in Memphis, and we played rock music and whatever we wanted to play. And of course, I started playing The Who on the radio station, and going back to my childhood, God, I've always wanted to be a part of The Who. So I would play their records, and when I went into the record business, the music business, I got a job at MCA Records. I got to meet The Who. So it was kind of a thing, went around in a circle. I was a kid, I was a teenager, I was playing their records, and now I met The Who.
Wow. And
that was kind of trippy because The Who were one of the most raucous bands I had ever seen in my life. I didn't really know what they were going to be like when I met them, but I'll tell you this: every night was an adventure with those guys. Basically, because of Keith Moon, who of course is their legendary drummer. There's so many stories I can tell you about. I'll tell you this: I first met Pete Townsend when I was on the plane with him as a promotion man from MCA Records, and I was recalling my memory of being a kid, listening to him, then playing him on the radio, and now I'm sitting next to Pete Townsend.
Wow. And
I was just recalling all of this stuff in my mind, going, I can't believe I'm sitting next to Pete Townsend, one of the greatest guitar players in the world. And he was kind of dozing a little bit, and I said, I've got to talk to this guy. I just got to say something to him because he was one of my idols. And he woke up, and I just said to him, hey, Pete, can you tell me who your favorite guitar player was when you were growing up as a kid? And he looked at me and said, sure, it was Steve Cropper from Booker T and the MGs. And I said, well, I know Steve Cropper very well. He said, wait a minute, you know Steve Cropper?
Wow.
I said, yeah. He said, I modeled everything after him. And do you have any stories about Steve Cropper? I said, sure, I got plenty of stories about Steve Cropper. So I started telling him stories about what things that happened at Stax Records, where Booker T and the MGs were, and about Steve himself. And all of a sudden I was engaged in this wonderful conversation with a guitar player that I idolized, got to ask him questions, and it was just an incredible moment for me, just because of all the history I'd had with The Who. But they were probably one of the most incredible bands in the world. To be honest with you, the drummer Keith Moon was probably one of the reasons they were the craziest band in the world.
Really? And how so? Please tell us.
Well, let me take that
one
back.
Of your stories.
The band wasn't the craziest band. Well, Keith Moon was one of the craziest members of a band I've ever met in my life.
Please elaborate.
Well, we were on the plane that night going from Memphis to Atlanta, and Keith Moon had it was a private plane with propellers and no jet, and it was a kind of a rickety plane. But in Memphis, there's a groupie named Sweet Sweet Connie, who's legendary. And if you don't know who Sweet Sweet Connie is, Google her. And she was a legendary groupie who always came to concerts in Memphis and usually went home with the band afterwards. And
wow.
And this happened constantly. And at this point, when we were in Memphis and flying out, we saw that Keith Moon had Sweet Sweet Connie on the plane, and he went back into the back of the plane where I guess it was a bedroom or something. And all of a sudden, he comes flying out of the back of the airplane and gets on the microphone and goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have to make a stop. We're dropping off Sweet Sweet Connie before we get to Atlanta, Georgia." And everybody started going, "What? What the hell are you doing?"
Oh, my God.
And sure enough, the plane lands in Little Rock, Arkansas. Sweet Sweet Connie walks off the plane, and we're back in the air. And everybody, of course, is pissed at Keith for making him stop in Little Rock.
And what an odd request to be dropped off in Little Rock.
It's a very odd request when you're flying from Memphis to Atlanta, and you all of a sudden the plane is landing in Little Rock to drop off a groupie.
Wow.
And that was just one of the many, many things that I saw Keith do. And he probably was one of the greatest drummers there is, but he's also one of the craziest men there ever was. He liked to do tricks on people. He liked to dress up as a policeman going into the hotel before a concert. We had to pay a $5,000 deposit to every hotel that we went to because of what Keith had done in the past by throwing TVs out the window and driving a car into a swimming pool at a Holiday Inn. And as a matter of fact, the Holiday Inn banned them from staying in any hotel in America after that, after the car and the swimming pool. But anyway, then the Who and their management were always bugging MCA about keeping him on the label. And they were, like I said, always bugging him in some way about keeping MCA as their record label. So the Who used to try to do things that MCA had to do to keep him on the label. And when the Who by Numbers album came out, the Who wanted to have a party in Houston where the concert kicked off. Mm-hmm. And so MCA flew in radio and record people and trade magazine people from all around the United States and people and journalists from Britain to Houston. And there was going to be a gigantic party, and MCA wanted to make it so big that when you walked into the party and said, "Give me a Jack and Coke," they would hand you the whole bottle of Jack Daniels. Or if you wanted a glass of champagne, the bartender would hand you a glass of champagne because MCA just wanted everybody loopy. But that was kind of an eye-opener when they hand you the whole bottle. And each song on the Who by Numbers album that we were celebrating had a song called Slip Kid. And so we rented a slide that was, a big, gigantic slide in the ballroom where we were, and people were sliding down it like crazy. But every song had something going on, and one of the songs was Squeezebox, one of their hit records. And our thought was to put 4 girls on a stage playing accordions. And these girls were strippers, actually, that we had hired. And the plan was to, when the Who came into the party, they would start playing Squeezebox. And Keith Moon would go over there and assess the situation. And the Who came down to the party, and Keith was signing women's breasts, and it was crazy. It was kind of a raucous affair. Like I said, people were drunk, and the plan was when the Who came down, we took Keith over to where the girls were on the stage with squeeze boxes, and all of a sudden, on our command, they dropped their tops. And then Keith Moon really got into that situation. And so there's 4 girls standing on the stage, topless, playing squeeze box, and they had little squeeze boxes. And Keith grabbed one and started playing along with them. And the pictures you'll see, you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Of course.
But anyway, so Keith decided he wanted to make the party a little crazier, and he asked one of the girls on the stage to perform a service for his roadie, and I really can't say what that is, but you can guess what he asked
I can
the
guess.
girls to do.
Mm-hmm, I can guess.
And so he puts his roadie up on the stage, and she does her thing, and then all of a sudden the crowd starts, circling around this whole thing, going, "What the hell's going on here?" And then, oh boy, and then Keith tells the girl to get on the floor, and then all of a sudden, the security cops we had came over and said, "No, this is not happening. There's no way this is going to happen." And they grabbed Keith Moon and handcuffed him.
Oh my.
He was still trying to, make this particular situation happen. So they handcuffed him, and then Pete Townsend and John Entwistle came over to try to, see what was going on. They handcuffed them and escorted all three of them out of the party. And all of a sudden, people were like, "What the hell just happened? We're having a great party. Now the Who are going to jail." And
wow.
And so the party kind of stopped at that point, and because it was such a crazy scene, and nobody could meet the Who. But anyway, we bailed Keith out of jail, and I don't think Townsend and Entwistle were actually put in jail, but Keith Moon was, and we bailed him out. And
do you remember what he was held on?
Pardon?
What the charges were that he was being held on?
Disorderly conduct.
Okay.
Disorderly conduct. You have to think about that.
Yes.
But anyway, that night we got back to the hotel, and the local promotion man was Wayne McManus for MCA, and his light was blinking on his phone, on his hotel room phone, and he said, "I really don't answer to see who that is," but it was still blinking. He picked it up, and the message was, "The president of MCA wants to see you in his room now." And Wayne had just gotten the job, and he was like, "Oh God, I'm going to lose my job over this, and I got an expense account, and I'm going to get fired." So Wayne and I walked up to the president's room, and he opened the door, and he asked Wayne, "Have you been drinking tonight?"
Sure.
And Wayne said, "No, sir, Mr. Maitland. This is one of my party here in Houston, and I wanted to be, as straight as possible. I haven't had nothing to drink." And so the president walks over to the bar, pours a glass of champagne, and hands it to Wayne, and he said, "Wayne, that was one of the best GD rock parties I've ever been to.
Oh.
Congratulations."
Wow.
And then the president said, "I want to get you out to Los Angeles to be a promotion man out there." And sure enough, Wayne McManus got a job as a promotion man in Los Angeles because of a crazy party that went out of control. But everybody started taking individual limos because they didn't want to be with Keith. And the Who were kind of funny because I don't think they really liked each other, to be honest with you. So that's why each one of them had their own limo.
Wow.
And which kind of didn't make sense, but if you knew Keith Moon, you knew it made sense. But so that was a party that was. Maybe you put up one of these pictures here I'm going to send you.
Sure, and it sounds like a legendary party. Now, did these antics go on in every city that you went to with them?
No, not necessarily, except, usually Keith Moon would do something crazy, like I said, throw a TV out of a 15th floor window and into an alley just because he could do it. He did blow up a waterbed on one of the tours, and it started leaking, and it leaked down into the next floor down, and the security people came flying up to their room, and I think they arrested him again for causing water to be leaked all over the hotel.
I mean, these are the stories that we really want to hear, the stories that are untold, the stories that no one knows about, and the true stories of the antics on the road and the behind-the-scenes stories. These are amazing.
Well, with The Who, it's easy because, a lot of people don't know these stories, and they were legendary stories in the industry. Actually, a lot of people in the industry didn't even really know these stories. But traveling with The Who was one of my greatest thrills in the world, just to stand on stage next to them and watch, like I said, watch Pete Townsend do his thing and Roger Daltrey throwing his microphone up in the air and catching it. And like you said, they were probably one of the loudest bands in the world. And yes, I do have hearing aids, and I blame that on The Who.
Yeah.
Because I just love to stand and listen to them as close as I could.
Right. I mean, being on the side of the stage of a Who concert, how many people can say they've done that?
Not many.
So how did you end up working with Keith Moon individually?
Well, like I said before The Who and their manager and their managers always made it tough on MCA because MCA wanted to re-sign the band to a new contract, and when that happened, The Who would come back with something so crazy that MCA had no choice but to do. And the thing that one of their managers came up with is that each member of the band should get their own solo album.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that met with a little bit of, brouhaha with the label, but they said, management said, if you don't, we're going to find another label. Anyway, so MCA said, okay, each person has their own their own individual record,
yes,
solo album. And Keith Moon did one. I think they gave him about $250,000 to record an album, and he did it in 24 hours, one night. It was probably known as one of the craziest rock and roll recordings ever because it was done in 24 hours. Some of the greatest musicians in the world were there with Keith, and Keith didn't sing. He didn't play drums like he normally did. He wanted to sing, and he was probably the worst singer I've ever heard in my life.
Wow.
And when we played this record for some radio stations, DJs were going, "John, there's no way we can play this record. It's so bad." And I hate to say that, Keith, but it was a bad album. And I would call it a drunken stupor recording session. But anyway, the album came out, and like I said, DJs were telling me they can't play this record. It's so bad. So my partner at MCA, Pete Gideon, and I had to come up with an idea, we thought, to try and get people to listen to this record and play it. And the album was called Two Sides of the Moon. And of course, on one side of the album cover, there was a girl with mooning somebody, and you could only see her butt. But you knew that Two Sides of the Moon was the title of the album. And so anyway, these are things that you just can't do anymore than what we did back then. I mean, maybe all promotion people should be in jail. I don't know, but we had to come up with some crazy idea. And Keith and I were both, Pete Gideon, my partner at MCA, and I were both famous mooners from our childhood. We used to moon people like crazy. So we thought, what if we hire a girl and we go around to all the trade magazines and all the radio stations in Los Angeles and come in and introduce this girl that we chose as his girlfriend. And our photographer was in on it, and he'd go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and she'd turn around and drop her pants. And that picture made most every trade magazine there is. But the interesting story about that whole thing is how we auditioned girls to do this particular stunt. And so when you worked at MCA Records, if anything you wanted, you had to call Universal Casting. And so I remember calling Universal Casting and going, we need 20 girls to come up and audition for us, and they have to drop their pants, show their butt. And the lady at Universal Casting said, get your boss on the phone. And my boss gets on the phone. He says, yeah, that's what we need. So the next morning I walk in, there's 20 girls sitting in the lobby of MCA Records. These are all actresses looking for work. And so Pete and I made up this little thing called the ASS scorecard. I'm not even sure if I should say that.
That's okay.
Anyway, then we just thought it'd be funny and have numbers by each girl's name. So they would walk in the door and a girl said, we'd say, what's your name? My name is Karen, and I'm here to audition. Okay, turn around and drop your pants and show your butt. And the majority of the girls knew exactly why they were there. They just wanted to have, get a job for that day. And one girl came in actually, and we told her what to do, and she went, I am not dropping my pants for you two perverts. And obviously she didn't know what the job was. But so we found the girl we liked on about the fifth audition. But there was 20 girls out there, and we said, well, we should just look at all 20.
Why not?
Why not? So we picked a girl, and we named her Harriet, and for many reasons. And she was the girl who went with us to the radio stations and did the drop your pants thing. And that picture made every trade magazine there was, because it was just a great picture.
And then we will be sharing this on the website.
Yeah, I'll send you the picture. Anyway, so it made every trade magazine, but still nobody wanted to play Keith Moon. We couldn't get anybody, maybe a few stations to play Keith Moon, his solo album.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to think of another idea, and we said, what if we get him to call radio stations, because Keith never was the person who got interviewed. They always wanted Roger Daltrey, or they always wanted Pete Townsend to come to the station. And we thought, well, maybe people will want to talk to Keith Moon because nobody ever does. And sure enough, he said, yeah, I'll do that. And we called the top 10 stations in America, FM stations, and said, would you like to do an interview with Keith Moon about his new album, Two Sides of the Moon? And every one of them said, yes, absolutely. So the interviews were scheduled to start at 10 in the morning, go for half an hour each, and Keith didn't show up. So I had to call every station and say, Keith's not feeling well. Can we redo this interview? And every station said, sure, no problem. But he was a guy who didn't exactly do what you always wanted him to do.
Right.
But finally, we got him into the station and to the MCA Tower. And first station we called was one in New York. And they were very excited because, like I said, nobody ever got to talk to Keith Moon. They always wanted Daltrey or Townsend. And so I'm sitting in my chair. I get the station on the phone. Introduce Keith here. It's Keith Moon's here, and he wants to talk to you. Blah blah blah. And so all of a sudden, I'm listening and I'm hearing him just kind of mumbling answers to questions, and that lasted about 10 minutes. And he said, I don't feel good. Hey, I got to go to the bathroom. I said, sure, go ahead and I'll get the next station on the phone. Are you okay? Hey, I'm fine. And he goes into the bathroom, comes back out, and he said, I just puked. I feel much better. And so, okay, great. We'll call the next station and get the interview started with them. And once again, he just started mumbling stuff to an answer to a question. And I just could tell right then this was not going to work. So I was kind of walking around the building while I was doing this interview, and I went back into my office, and he was passed out on my desk. And so we had to end the interviews. And the limo driver came up and picked him up, and he was a total wreck. I mean, when he finally decided he wanted to do the interviews, I went over to his house to make sure we could get him in the limo. And I went up and knocked on the door, and somebody answered, and he hollered up, "Mooney, there's somebody from MCA Records here to see you." And I heard Keith Moon say, "I'll be down shortly." And so he had a party the night before. I could tell because there was like food on the ceiling and whatever, panties everywhere, whatever. And so I had to go to the bathroom, and I went in there. There was no commode. There was no toilet there. And he came down. I said, "Keith, your toilet is blown up, or it's all over the place." And he said, "Yeah, we had a party last night, and I wanted to show me mates how you blow up a toilet with a cherry bomb." And I just kind of shook my head going, "Oh, this is going to be a long day." But so we walk outside, and of course he wants to see the girl that we had hired and to do her thing, and she did. And he said, "Great," and got the car and took off, and we hit every trade magazine in Los Angeles. And the same thing happened. Girl would turn around, drop her pants at the appropriate time. And that picture made, like I said, all the trade magazines, but it really didn't result in any airplay because, like I said, this album was so bad.
Yeah, you have to have a good song.
Yeah, if you don't have a good song, you're in trouble.
Yes.
Or a good singer, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And Keith was not a singer, unfortunately. Like I said, he was a great drummer. I loved his drums, but he couldn't sing. But that's just, and then Roger Daltrey did a solo album, and Pete Townsend did one, John Entwistle did one. They're much better than Keith Moon's. And
you worked with them as well?
Well, when Roger Daltrey had his solo album, maybe 6 weeks later, finished, they sent me on a 2-week promotional tour with Roger. And I was like over the top because I'm traveling with, one of my heroes. And it was me, him, and his manager. And we're going for a 2-week tour of the United States to introduce Roger to DJs and to do record signings at record stores. And the first record store was in Dallas, and 5,000 kids showed up in front about 10 o'clock in the morning. They called the police, and all of a sudden, the big plate of glass came flying. Kids were pushing up against it, and it came flying down. And the policeman actually caught the glass before it hit the floor. Thank God. But anyway, so they canceled that autograph session and decided they couldn't take a chance on that happening again. So every city we were supposed to go to, there was no album signing. We just did interviews with the radio stations. And so before we went to the first city, his manager told me that there was one request that Roger had, that after every dinner at night, he wanted a lady in his room who was had red hair and over 6 foot tall. And I'm just like kind of choked, like, what? What are you talking about? He said, "That's what we want." That's what Roger was. And so I had to call each city we were going to and ask the promotion guy to do what Roger wanted. And the first one we went to was Dallas, and like I said, the local Dallas, I didn't tell you this, but the local Dallas guy was named Ed Spacek, and he was Sissy Spacek's brother. And he said, "No, I can't do that. I'm kind of a religious guy." And I said, "Do you want a job or not?" He said, "Okay, I'll do it." So anyway, that happened in every city we went to. And Roger he's like 5'6". I didn't quite understand the whole thing, but I didn't question it. But every night, there was a girl in his room, I have no idea what they did, what they were doing. I didn't care. But that was one of the crazy moments of my life when I had to do something stupid like that, or not stupid, but crazy.
And those were the times when anything goes.
And the album was a hit record and got lots of airplay and did very good on the charts. And that was my experience with Roger Daltrey, which was kind of strange. Well, it was kind of crazy, actually. I loved it, it just was something that would happen. I mean, there were so many, I can't tell you how many girls, anytime they saw Roger Daltrey, we were walking in a store or something, I mean, they just went nuts. And I understand why, because he was a good-looking guy, and he always had the vest on with no the leather jacket on with no shirt underneath it. But anyway, I loved working with Roger. That was fun. We had a blast. I've got a picture too. I'll send you there that you can show on your podcast of the last city we visited. And I was worn out after 2 weeks traveling with this guy. And the picture will show you what we looked like after 2 weeks of going to 10 cities in America.
I can only imagine. And then on top of everything, dealing with Keith Moon had to be exhausting.
Exhausting. Every hotel requested a $5,000 deposit before the band came, and the deposit was for Keith Moon's room, because he'd been known to, tear up things and throw things. And so, yeah, the record company had to put up a $5,000 deposit just for Keith Moon before the hotel would let them, stay in their hotel.
Wow. That had to have been incredible.
It was crazy. I mean, it was just a slice of rock and roll that, I'd never seen before, but I kind of imagined things like that, but nothing this crazy. But, I love The Who, and I would do anything I could for them. But that was kind of my experience with The Who, and something I'll never forget.
Well, these are incredible stories. We've been enjoying now for 42 minutes, if you can believe it, and that's probably just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, it's the tip of the iceberg.
Well, we're going to do part 2 at another time, and we're going to discuss other groups that you worked with. They're all iconic.
I worked with a bunch of great groups. I'm so lucky in life to have worked with these bands that I never dreamed I would be working with. And it was the most exciting time of my life, I think.
Well, that's why we're getting these stories down, and these stories are incredible. I can't wait to continue talking with you about all the other incredible artists that you work with. There's so many hidden histories that we want to uncover, and I just want to thank you so much for joining me on my inaugural podcast and getting this kicked off. And I know there's so many fans out there that really are going to enjoy listening to these stories. And we will continue bringing you these stories and uncovering the hidden histories of rock and roll. Make sure you subscribe on Facebook or Instagram at Hidden History of Rock and Roll. You can email us any questions or any artists you'd like to hear at hiddenhistoryofrockandroll@gmail.com. Thank you, Jon Scott. You have been amazing, and we're going to continue these stories. We're not going to let you leave so quickly, but we are going to wrap up this podcast. And thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you tremendously.
It was my pleasure, and I hope these stories are worthy of your podcast.
Absolutely. They're the catalyst for this podcast. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you soon. Rock on.
Thank you, Tiffany.